Hi everybody, I'm Zilla Blitz and welcome. Today we're going to do an unboxing of Pensacola, which is GMT Games game number 6 in their Battles of the American Revolution series. Now this is designed by Miklos and Hanle, published in 2010. So we're going to open it up, take a look, offer some initial impressions, and then offer at least some impressions too on how this might compare to some of the other games in the series. So let's jump in and get started. So Pensacola fought in the American Revolution, was interesting, fought again in 1781, was interesting in that it was not necessarily a battle between U.S. forces and British forces, but more so Spanish forces against English forces. The Spanish forces were sieging the British fortifications near Pensacola, and that's really the essence of this battle, a siege and then an assault on the British fortifications. That makes this game, I think, interesting to compare to some of the other games in the series, both in terms of just kind of its historical perspective, and then also in terms of how it impacts the gameplay. So one of the things I want to do is, as we look at this game, because again, this is volume 6 in that series of Battles of the American Revolution, I want to compare just some of the ratings that are on this one to the ratings that come from the American Revolution tri-pack, Guilford, Saratoga, and Brandywine. Because the ratings here are quite a bit different than the ratings in Pensacola, and I think that says quite a bit about some of the gameplay that's going on in this game. Not good, not bad, just different than these other 3 games in the series, and perhaps different on the whole from many of the other games in this series. And so let's get started to kind of take a look at what I mean. Now this is about 1.5-inch box, fairly moderate heft to it, not super heavy. I mean, it's not an overloaded pack. Right hand side, we can see some of the other games in the series. At this point in time, I think there were 7 out. I think there are 9 in total now. But let's take a look down here at the game meter, because this is where I think it starts to get fairly interesting fairly quickly. So I had heard this series is relatively easy to learn. In many ways, one of these series, it has a core set of rules, and then it's going to have rules that are specific to this battle. And so one of the advantages of a series like this is that you learn the core rules, and then to play the next game in the series, you just learn the special rules that are for that particular battle. So I was somewhat surprised here to see that this has a complexity rating of 6 on it, which feels pretty high, right? I mean, in GMT 6 this is quite a bit of learning. So I'm like, wow. And as I was looking through the rules, I was like, yeah, this feels like it has a lot of heft to it. I mean, there's a lot of mechanics here that are going on. So it feels fairly complicated, and that 6 feels roughly, I would say, on target. And then I was curious as to how it compares to the other games in the series, at least from that tri-pack. And what's interesting is that the complexity rating from the tri-pack, which I'll show here as well, comes out at a 4. So at least relative to these other 3 games in the series, this one is rating considerably higher in terms of complexity. Another thing, this one rates low on the solitaire scale, suitability, at a 2 out of 9, whereas the other 3 games from the tri-pack rate pretty high, at a 7. So as we look at the components, I'm going to offer some thoughts as to why I think that might be the case. And I'm going to also offer a little bit as to why I think the complexity might be relatively high for this one too. So with all that being said, let's jump in and take a look at what we've got inside. So, as with, I assume most of the games in this series, if not all of them, we have 2 rule books. And this gets at that idea again. We're going to have the series rule book, which are kind of the core rules that apply. This is going to be same across all games in this Battles of the American Revolution series. And then we have the exclusive rule book, or the special rule book, which is just the rules for this game. And this is where I think the complexity becomes fairly apparent, because if we look through these kind of core rules, they're relatively straightforward. I mean, this is pretty big text, 2 columns. We have 12 pages altogether, a lot of space between things, expanded sequence of play. I mean, not too many graphics, but they're relatively straightforward. In kind of glancing through them and kind of skimming through them, they have mechanics that you would kind of expect of a series of this technology level. So there's close combat, there's going to be mechanics handling artillery, rifle fire, movement, zones of control. So these are all terms and mechanics that are fairly similar and fairly familiar to anyone who's played a lot of Hex Encounters war games. And that's the set of kind of standard rules. So this feels like a pretty light lift as far as the series rulebook goes. Now, I can't compare to the other games in the series yet. Let's put that here, I guess. But one of the things I did thought, as soon as you get to the Pensacola rulebook, this 24 pages, this is quite a bit of stuff to it. And what you realize is that the gameplay, it's very much divided up into, it's almost I hesitate to say 2 games in one because that's not true, but it's 2 games that play very differently. You have basically the first half of the game is a siege where you're kind of the Spanish forces establishing and setting up the siege and the conditions under which you're going to launch your final assault. And in that one, each game turn is roughly 2 days. Then when you get to the battle itself and you launch the assault, each turn is only an hour. And there's a distinct point in time when the Spanish forces are going to declare that assault, that raid, or that final attack, if you would, on the British forces, and that's where the game changes. And so as a result, you've got a lot of rules that are handling both of those situations. And the gameplay is going to change, rules change, things move around, and there's a lot of mechanics that have to be established outside of simple things like movement, rifle fire, artillery fire, zones of control, cavalry, and stuff like that, when you've got to also kind of establish how you're going to be able to set up these kind of fortifications, how you're going to be able to create breaches. And so a lot of these rules here are kind of very particular to a game that's focused on, a good part of it is focused on siege combat. And so as a result, I think that's how this goes from a 4 compared to the standard series to a 6 for this particular game, because really you've got a siege game with attached to the standard rules and then a final assault that changes everything. So it feels like that's where a lot of the complexity is coming from. Raids are also part kind of the British thing. And so we can see here the rules that, it's not incredibly dense, but there is, there's quite a bit to it here. Now, once we get to page 13, we're done with the supplemental rules and we get the scenarios. So it's really kind of 12 pages of core rules, 13 pages here of kind of specific rules, extended rules just for this battle. And then we do have a couple of scenarios. There is the historical assault scenario, and there's the siege only scenario. And then, of course, there's the one that the full game is combining those together. So I guess you could say 2 kind of half scenarios, and then the full game would be there as well. So we do have, an element here where you could play a shorter game by not opting in playing the full game. You could play either half of the game, either the assault or the siege, or play both of those components together. Now, this historical summary, often I feel like sometimes these are tossed in, but this is excellent, actually. This is written by Don Hanle, who is a professor, Joint Military Intelligence College, and it's edited by Mark Miklos. But this is outstanding. I thought I was going to kind of just skim through this, and the very first thing I did was read through the whole thing word for word, and thought, wow, what a great overview and explanation of the strategy and the tactics and some of the details on this battle. So reading this, I would highly recommend this because it really sets the scene for what you're going to be playing, and it makes you kind of want to jump in and play. Just brilliantly written. Then we have the order of battle here, and then we have a printout of the counters at the end. So altogether, we're looking at about 24 pages worth of rules. And again, that complexity of a 6, because there are so many little mechanics there going on, it's going to be holding quite a bit and kind of working through a kind of a rather, there's a lot here to both of these sequences of play, if you would. So there's quite a bit of meat to this. Now, there also, and kind of I want to think back on terms of why that solitaire rating was a 2. There, in addition to this game as well, is a rather substantial deck of cards, and these are the event cards. Now, as both the British player and the Spanish player are going to be picking from these event cards, and I'll show some close-ups here on some of these. They really add a lot of variety and randomness, if you would, to the game. Spanish ammunition shortage, French demand coup de main, Spanish scalps. Just some real creativity here in terms of bringing some of the anecdotal and the story of this campaign, this battle, to the game through the use of these random events generated in the card deck. And these can be played at various times during the game turn by both players to influence the events that are going on. And I think this is why, because you don't know what cards your opponent has, and those cards can significantly influence the actions you're trying to take in the game. I have a feeling this is why the solitaire rating drops down to a 2, because of the way these card play influences the events in the battle. So as a solitaire player, certainly you can play it, but you're going to lose a little bit of that unpredictability because you're going to know exactly what the other person has in terms of their hand. But really, it looks like a tremendous amount of research and excellent, I would say, execution for bringing these into the game. There is a second, shorter deck of cards, and I confess I don't yet know how these work. They're tactics cards, and it looks like there are one set for each player, and they have basically what you're doing. So attack, echelon, commit, reserve. I'm not quite sure, withdraw, on how these work within the game, like if this is a hidden mechanic or if this is just a mechanic that's kind of establishing what's going on. Obviously, if this were a hidden mechanic and it's kind of a rock, paper, scissors type of thing, this further kind of substantiates why you would make this a 2 on a solitaire rating if these are kind of hidden in terms of how they're going to be delivered in gameplay. And we have a note here telling you what's in the box. A couple of the odds and ends. Baggies. Nothing says I love you like a set of baggies in a war game. We have a brilliant blue and red 10-sided die, one of each. And now let's take a look at the counters. Now I noticed as I was looking through some of the history on these games, and I'll show some close-ups on these counters too, these won a number of design awards. And, for a game coming out now, this is 2010, so this is 12 years old. These are brilliant counters. I mean, just very colorful, very informative, lots of, I think one of the successes of game design is when you look at the map or look at the counters or even the rule book to a certain degree, does it make you want to play? And just the color that's here and the information and the way the figures are posed and things like that, this makes me want to play. I mean, the markers are cool. Get destroyed road, destroyed stockade, Indian withdrawal, frontal assault, battery destroyed, morale control. There's a lot going on. And not, a lot of these, I'd say half of these are markers. And I think this bottom right here, actually, these I think are erratic counters from some of the earlier games in the series. So I think these are different ones, and these are the game counters. And we have the Spanish forces on and their allies on the yellow, on the left, and the English and allied forces on the right. But so there's not a ton of units going on here. I mean, really, these top are what? That's 8 times 2, 16, 32 and some change, 40 and 32, 40 and 40 roughly. So not heavy counter density. I think it's going to be a relatively quick playing game once you get through the sequence of play and understand all of the different elements there. And they are printed on both sides with looks like some step reductions for some of the counters on the back here, and then some different markers that are useful for kind of keeping track of the action on the game as well. So there are our counters, and we have some playing aids and the map to look at. So this is the sequence of play. Again, we can see the binary nature of gameplay with this, in that we have the siege turn sequence of play and then the coup de main turn sequence on the right-hand side here. So again, once the Spanish player declares the assault, it's going to go to this other sequence of play, and this is where you play these hourly turns to finish the game. That is two-sided, as we have here player aid card number 2, which is Fortified Hex and Hex's Matrix. So this is, I confess I don't quite know what this does, but it's going to be dependent upon what you're attacking, which fortification you're attacking, some of the movement modifiers, and then some of the results. It looks like this got some fairly good heft to it. It's not a chart that I'm looking at that I say, oh, I immediately know what this does. So again, getting at that idea that there is some complexity to this game. Now this is a second one that's absolutely identical. So one for each player in this case as we look at these. Then we have another 2. This is player aid card number 1. 2 of them provided, which is always nice, 1 for each player. These are kind of morale adjustments, victory point schedules, as we can kind of see here. But lots of tables to handle a lot of the different elements of gameplay and different kind of situations the game has to move through as you're talking about a game that's going to manage both a siege element and a preparation for siege, as well as an assault component to it. So lots going on, and here is the terrain effects chart. There's weather as well, which impacts things. And then again, when you add in all of the different events here, I mean, I think one of the things that's exciting about this game is it feels like a game that's going to offer a rich variety of action to really kind of paint the history of this battle in a way that, I mean, there's some complexity that's involved in learning it, but I think you're going to be rewarded by some very, very rich historical gameplay. Now, I'll show a close-up on this map. It's fairly large. It's paper, glossy, somewhat glossy paper, and really colorful. I mean, we can see here, of course, the city of Pensacola, and I'll show a close-up here. The British fortifications north of the city. So these would be the places where the Spanish are attacking. And we can also see the city of Pensacola. There's water movement involved up the top of this map, and we can see on that kind of the zoom, the close-up there, we can see the day battles where every turn is 2 days, and then the coup de main, the assault track, where you've got 10 turns, each one of which is an hour. But a rich kind of map here, lots of swamp on the side here. And scrub, palmetto scrub kind of in the way. So terrain certainly playing a factor in the lush, overgrown region of Florida here. So there is our game, Pensacola, volume number 6 in the series. Now, I got this game as kind of a toss-in when I was buying some used games from another local Minnesota resident, and so I thought the series looks pretty interesting. Looking through this now, I think what I will do, because of its complexity rating of a 6 and its solitaire rating of a 2, I think I'm going to be inclined to start with the tri-pack games as kind of a little bit, looks like they're going to be a little bit easier to dig into, a little bit higher in solitaire rating, and then extend out into this one. So this might not be the best place to start with this series. And again, if you're just looking to start with this series, that tri-pack that GMT Games has, and we'll do an unboxing on that at some point in the near future as well, is incredible value. I mean, you've got the 3 games in one box. So I think that feels like a really good launching point for this series. And this one feels like a really nice game to lean into after you've played some of those games and are looking for, okay, what are some other things that the system can do to handle kind of this unique siege and then assault type of confrontation. So it looks like a really neat addition to the series, a little bit more learning involved, but that kind of painting a rich history of the battle and really kind of bringing in a lot of mechanics into this series. And again, this series in itself, the Battles of the American Revolution, I've heard only good things about it. So kind of looking forward as time allows to start really kind of bringing these to the table and to start to explore what they might offer. And again, I'm not going to start with Pensacola to the table just because of, I think, its complexity and its low solitaire rating. So probably once we do bring things to the table, it'll be kind of Guilford or Saratoga or Brandywine first, and we'll do an unboxing on that. But there you go, a little bit of an unboxing and some impressions on how this looks to compare to some of the other games in the series, at least the ones that I can see right now. If you have enjoyed this, please give it a thumbs up. If you're new, please consider subscribing. About 40 to 50% of the content on the channel is Wargaming content. And thanks so much for tuning in, and have a great day.